If you're hearing this, then you need to know one thing right away. The moment we thought we still had time, it ended tonight. At 02:14 UTC, every major observatory on Earth picked up the same impossible signal. 3I Atlas, the interstellar object that slipped into our solar system last year, just changed its trajectory again. Not drifted, not adjusted. It turned, deliberately, directly toward us. And if you keep listening, I promise you something you won't easily forget. By the end of this story, you will understand why the people monitoring it are no longer debating scientific theories. They're debating survival strategies. Not in a Hollywood way, not with laser weapons or spaceships, but with the only thing humans actually have: numbers, physics, time, and a rapidly shrinking margin of error. It started quietly. No explosions, no shockwaves, no bright flashes across the sky. Just a subtle spike in the deep space radar profiles from the network in Svalbard. A shift so small it could have been noise. But it wasn't noise, because 4 minutes later, another station in Australia registered the same shift. Then South Africa, then Japan. It took roughly 8 minutes until the global triangulation model snapped into place and the result hit the screens like a punch to the chest. 3I Atlas had executed a turn of 0.0004 degrees. That sounds tiny, insignificant. But in space, at that scale, at that distance, a turn that small is the difference between bypassing Earth forever or hitting it dead on. And Atlas had chosen dead on. When the alert went out, the scientists monitoring it tried to stay calm. They always do. But something was different this time. They weren't whispering theories. They weren't arguing about pressure jets or outgassing models. They were silent. Because if Atlas was a natural object, if it was just a rock, just a frozen body drifting through the void, then nothing in the known universe should allow it to make a maneuver like that. That turn meant intention, or force. And whichever it was, it meant trouble. Serious trouble. Minutes after the turn, the brightness fluctuated again. Not like a comet, not like anything with an orbital coma. More like a pulse. A dimming and rising rhythm measured in a sequence that the AI at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory flagged as non-random periodicity. In plain English, a pattern. Something repeating. Something broadcasting. Something alive? No one dared say the word, but everyone felt it. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened inside the emergency call that followed, because one of the participants leaked the audio. And once you hear the details, you'll understand why this escalated from a scientific anomaly to a planetary threat in minutes. First, they recalculated the trajectory. Not once, not 5 times, 27. Every model confirmed the same thing. If nothing changes, 3I Atlas will intersect Earth's orbital path in 61 days. That's 8 weeks. 8 weeks until the closest pass of any interstellar object in human history. But according to the high error margin model, a pass wasn't even guaranteed. A collision wasn't off the table. The earliest probability map gave a 2.3% impact chance. That may sound small, but when you're talking about something the size of a mountain traveling faster than a bullet fired from a railgun, 2% is enough to keep the entire planet awake. But that wasn't the worst part. What terrified them wasn't the trajectory. It was the energy reading. Atlas wasn't passive. It was warming. Objects drifting through space cool over time. They do not spontaneously heat unless something interacts with them. But Atlas was generating energy, and not slowly. Its thermal signature rose by 11 Kelvin in under an hour. Imagine a kilometer-wide iceberg in the middle of the vacuum suddenly heating itself like it had an engine inside. That's why one of the scientists, Dr. Hussein, whispered the line that leaked online. If it can heat itself, it can accelerate. And if it can accelerate, then Earth is no longer dealing with an object. Earth is dealing with an opponent. They didn't use that word publicly, of course. They said an anomalous interstellar visitor. They said unpredictable behavior. They said ongoing analysis. But behind closed doors, they were brutally honest. If it can change direction whenever it wants, how do we stop it? What does humanity do against something that doesn't give us a chance to understand it before it acts? The first strategy proposed was deflection, but the numbers were bleak. Atlas is large enough that any nuclear detonation near it wouldn't deflect it. It would barely scratch it. And even if it fractured, the fragments would still hit Earth like shotgun pellets from hell. Kinetic impactors, too slow to launch in time. Gravity tractors, worthless against something that can override gravity. So they considered the unthinkable. Communication. Not talking, not diplomacy. Detection. Sending a signal, seeing if it responds. But even that terrified them. Because what if it already knows we're here? What if the turn wasn't a coincidence? What if its path wasn't random to begin with? The scariest part is we might not be the observers in this scenario. We might be the target. Meanwhile, the public noticed nothing. The night sky looked normal. The news talked about markets and elections. The world spun on, unaware that a frozen visitor the size of a mountain was silently adjusting its aim. But down in the control room at the European Space Operations Center, something else was unfolding. Something that has not been released anywhere. When Atlas turned, it wasn't just aiming. It slowed down. A deceleration of 0.00012%. A microscopic change, but a recorded one. Natural objects do not slow down in deep space. They have no friction, no drag, nothing to reduce their speed. Unless they want to reduce their speed. A retired mission analyst, one who worked on Rosetta years ago, explained it bluntly. Slowing down is what you do when you're approaching a destination. So now Earth wasn't facing a distant threat. It was facing an approaching one. Every expert in the room described it differently, but they all meant the same thing. Atlas wasn't falling through space. It was arriving. That changes the equation. Suddenly, this isn't about orbital mechanics. It's about defense. And every country with a space agency is scrambling because no one has a protocol for confronting an object that might be able to think. The last hour of logs from the telescopes shows something even more disturbing. Each time Earth's radar systems pinged Atlas, the object emitted a faint electromagnetic spike back toward the source. Reflexively, like an echo, like it was listening or scanning. One of the analysts said it out loud, even though he knew he shouldn't. It knows we're watching. That's the moment fear replaced curiosity. And that's when the question shifted from, what is Atlas, to what does Atlas want? The part I'm about to tell you hasn't been published anywhere. It's from an encrypted message leaked by someone inside the U.S. Deep Space Network. According to their simulations, Atlas isn't heading toward Earth by accident. When the object turned, the turn wasn't random. It aligned itself with a vector that takes it not toward the planet in general, but toward a very specific region. A region the simulations labeled as Continental Target Estimate. They don't know which continent yet. They don't want to guess. But something about the way Atlas adjusted its heading suggests it's not trying to collide with Earth. It's trying to approach Earth. Close. Controlled. Like something approaching a station, or an anchor point, or a landing. Humanity is officially preparing for contact, collision, or confrontation. But the truth is, none of the scientists are confident which one it will be, or whether we even get to choose. And while the world sleeps, 3I Atlas continues moving, quietly, smoothly, purposefully. And tomorrow, when the updated trajectory numbers come out, the world will wake up to a headline no one is ready for. Earth has 61 days. That is, if the object doesn't adjust again. because if it can turn toward us once, it can do it again. And if it can slow down once, it can stop. And if it can stop, it can arrive. And if it arrives, the question won't be whether Earth can stop Atlas. The question will be whether Earth ever had a chance.
They say the second night is always worse than the first, and now I know why. Last night was when 3IAT turned toward Earth. That alone should have been enough to paralyze every government on the planet. But tonight is when they started trying to stop it. And the worst part isn't that their plan failed. It's that Atlas reacted. Not with violence, not with aggression, but with something far more terrifying: precision. As if it understood what was being done, as if it anticipated it. And I promise you this, once you hear what happened in the last 24 hours, you will realize humanity isn't just dealing with an oncoming object. We're dealing with something that thinks faster than we do. Something that learns. Something that might already know how this ends. After the turn toward Earth, world leaders demanded an emergency session. You've probably seen the press release already. Calm, sanitized, almost friendly. Words like anomaly, close pass, monitoring coordination. Nothing about the panic behind the cameras. Nothing about the arguments exploding across the room when the United States suggested something everyone else had quietly feared. If it's coming toward us, we need to consider defense. The word defense sounds harmless, scientific, rational. But behind closed doors, it meant only one thing: weapons. The first proposal was the simplest: send a probe. Not to attack Atlas, but to observe it up close. Films and documentaries make that sound easy. Launch a spacecraft, fly toward the object, record everything. But Atlas is moving tens of kilometers per second, and every hour it accelerates a little more. Sending a probe after something that can change direction at will is like trying to chase a bullet with a paper airplane. Still, they tried. They repurposed an old reconnaissance platform left over from a canceled asteroid mission. The craft wasn't built to survive deep space, but it was the only thing ready to launch in 72 hours or less. They named it Helios 9. Though unofficially, the engineers called it the DART. One throw, one chance, no corrections. The plan was simple. Fire Helios 9 on a trajectory ahead of Atlas, let the object come to it, and record data as it passed. Nobody expected miracles. They just needed eyes closer than telescopes could provide. The launch window was narrow. Too narrow. The weather over the spaceport was unstable, the winds too strong, the stratosphere too turbulent. But waiting wasn't an option. Atlas was still adjusting its path, still inching closer to the critical course line. So they launched in bad conditions, hoping for a miracle. And for a moment it looked like they got one. Helios 9 broke through the cloud deck flawlessly. The world didn't know anything about it. The live feed wasn't public. Even the teams watching it didn't speak, afraid their voices might jinx something. Then, at an altitude of 22 kilometers, the unexpected happened. Not an explosion, not a malfunction, a signal. A burst of electromagnetic noise from the direction of Atlas. The instruments on Helios 9 went dead for 0.3 seconds, just long enough to cause panic. When the feed returned, everything looked normal. But the telemetry was off. The probe had drifted a fraction of a degree to the left. No one could explain why. Thrusters weren't firing, Wind shear couldn't account for it. The shift was tiny, but it was the same kind of tiny that began this entire nightmare. The same kind of tiny that sent Atlas onto a collision course. Someone whispered, "It knows." No one wanted to admit that. Not yet. The probe kept climbing. By minute 8, it was through the atmosphere. By minute 11, it was accelerating into its interplanetary burn. But something else was happening now. Something NASA and ESA both tried to hide until the data leaked. The signal from Atlas changed. Not the usual pulses, not the random spikes. This was rhythmic, structured. The AI flagged it as directed periodic emission. A message? A warning? Or something far worse, sensing. As if Atlas was analyzing the probe, watching it, calculating it. The scientist who leaked the file admits he almost unplugged the monitors when the spectral lines began to align into a sequence, one that mirrored the telemetry of Helios 9 almost perfectly. The object was mapping the probe's trajectory in real time. But still they pushed forward, and for a few hours they actually felt hope, until Helios 9 reached 4.2 million kilometers from Earth. That's when Atlas reacted, not with heat, not with light, but with gravity. It altered its velocity, just slightly, just enough to ensure that the probe would miss it by several thousand kilometers instead of crossing its projected path. Atlas dodged. That was the moment every remaining skeptic in the room fell silent. Natural objects do not dodge probes. Natural objects do not avoid encounters. But Atlas swerved, purposefully, smoothly, as if it were avoiding something beneath it, or behind it, or maybe simply avoiding us. Helios 9 flew by uselessly, its cameras pointed at empty black. The probe never even got a glimpse, as if Atlas refused to be seen. When Mission Control realized what happened, a quiet horror filled the room, because this wasn't about technology. This was about strategy. The object didn't disable the probe, didn't destroy it, didn't even interfere with it. It did something far scarier. It denied access, as if it understood what we were trying to do and countered it with minimal effort. That's when global agencies finally faced the truth they'd been trying to avoid. If Atlas can predict, adapt, and react faster than our systems can compute, then humanity isn't trying to stop a rock. We're trying to stop an intellect. Maybe not conscious in the way we understand, maybe not alive, but certainly active, purposeful, directed. And with every correction Atlas made, Earth's window of possible defenses shrank. By the time they recalculated the impact probability, the number jumped to 7%. That's not a small number. That's Russian roulette with a loaded chamber. Meanwhile, the object kept drawing closer. 58 days. That's what the clock shows now. But there's something else. Something the public hasn't been told. After dodging Helios 9, Atlas adjusted its rotation rate. Telescopes observed a subtle wobble at first, then a stabilization into a new rotational speed. And not just any rotation speed, a resonant frequency, one that matches the natural oscillation of Earth's magnetic field. You don't need to be a physicist to understand why that terrified every specialist monitoring the data. Resonance is amplification. Resonance is interaction. Resonance is the gateway to influence. If something can tune itself to Earth's magnetic frequency, it can connect, or disrupt, or manipulate, or worse, shifted again, not toward Earth this time, toward the Sun. A micro-turn, no more than 1,000th of a degree, but enough to change the energy it receives, enough to warm it further, enough to charge it. That was the moment a scientist in the Ukrainian Space Weather Laboratory said the line that has since been quoted in every leaked document. It's preparing. The question is, preparing for what? Theories began to split into two camps. One believes Atlas is a vessel, not necessarily a ship in the science fiction sense, but a container of something, information, material, or energy carried through interstellar space for reasons we cannot guess. The other camp believes it is a weapon, not in the sense of intention, but in the sense of effect, something that transforms a planetary system simply by entering it. A catalyst, a trigger, a seed. No one knows which is right, but both theories end the same way. Earth is not observing a visitor. Earth is encountering a purpose. While governments debated, independent observatories started noticing something else. Every time Atlas performed a micro-adjustment, every tilt, every correction, Earth's ionosphere reacted, very slightly, very faintly, as if receiving a distant ripple, or maybe reflecting one. The ripple wasn't dangerous, at least not yet, but its timing matched Atlas's movements perfectly, and that raises a terrifying question. Is Atlas communicating with us already, and we just don't understand the language? Or worse, is it affecting us already, and we just haven't noticed the consequences? Meanwhile, panic is silently spreading through the agencies. You won't see that on television. You won't hear it from officials or spokespeople. But I have the transcripts. I have the leaked calls. The fear is real. One of the senior analysts at the European Space Agency summed it up in one sentence: "We are not ready for this." Yet, Earth must respond. Doing nothing is not an option. If Atlas is approaching Earth intentionally, we cannot wait to see what happens when it arrives. So they moved to the next stage, interdiction. The word sounds harmless, but it means one thing: stopping the object, physically. The plan was rushed, desperate, full of holes, but it was all they had. 3 nations agreed to collaborate: the United States, France, and Japan. Each would prepare a kinetic interceptor, essentially a massive projectile launched on a collision course with Atlas, not to destroy it, that was impossible, but to push it, nudge it, alter its path by millimeters at first, then kilometers, then millions of kilometers by the time it reaches Earth. A planetary-scale billiard shot. That's the theory. The reality was worse. When Atlas made its last course correction earlier today, it positioned itself in such a way that the standard interception routes became nearly impossible. Any projectile would need to launch at velocities human engineering has never achieved, and calculations show Atlas could counter any approach simply by adjusting its own course slightly. It would be like throwing a pebble at a helicopter while the helicopter actively dodges. Still, the interceptors were green-lit. The first launch is scheduled in 9 days. But here's the part that keeps the scientists awake. Atlas hasn't responded to these preparations, not with defense, not with evasion, not with aggression. It's simply watching.
Every time Earth sends a radar ping, it replies with a faint echo. Not identical, slightly altered, as if returning the signal processed through something. Maybe it's harmless, maybe it's nothing. But when the echoes were analyzed by 3 independent labs, they all reported the same anomaly. The returned signal contains data not present in the original. Information Earth didn't send. That changes everything. Because if Atlas isn't just reflecting signals, it's sending its own. One of the leaked spectral breakdowns suggests Atlas may be transmitting a map. Not a map of stars, not a map of space, a map of Earth. Topographic, detailed, updated in real time. The object isn't just approaching us, it's studying us. The leaked transcript ends with the most chilling line I've heard so far. The head of the Deep Space Analysis Division said it, quietly, almost to himself. We're not preparing for impact, we're preparing for arrival. Because Atlas is not behaving like something falling, or drifting, or wandering. It is behaving like something coming home. Now, Earth is out of time. 57 days left, and tomorrow, the first global briefing for military and scientific leaders begins. But before it does, something else happened an hour ago. Something small, but catastrophic for what little hope we had left. Atlas accelerated again. Not by much, but enough to reduce its arrival time by 20 hours. Enough to show it can control its speed with pinpoint accuracy. Enough to prove it doesn't just know where it's going. It knows exactly when it wants to get there. And the scariest part, every model now predicts the same thing. Atlas won't hit Earth. It'll stop near Earth. Which means one thing. It isn't coming to kill us. It's coming for something else entirely. And whatever that something else is, humanity is running out of time to figure it out.
If the first 2 days were fear, then the third day was something far worse. Realization. Not the dramatic kind, not the Hollywood kind, but the cold, paralyzing realization that Earth was about to confront something no model, no simulation, no scientific framework had ever prepared humanity for. Because today is when 3I Atlas finally responded to us. Not violently, not loudly, but unmistakably. And if you stay with me through this, I guarantee you'll understand why the scientists monitoring Atlas have stopped asking, "What is it?" and started asking, "What does it want?" The moment it happened wasn't spectacular. There was no blinding flash across the sky, no dramatic break in the radio spectrum. Instead, it began as something deceptively small, a drop in background radiation. The kind of drop no one notices unless they're staring directly at solar wind data at 3 a.m., which is exactly what a Norwegian research team was doing. The drop lasted 11 seconds, but what came after lasted long enough to terrify every agency on Earth. Atlas emitted a signal. Not an echo, not a reflection, a transmission. A narrow, focused beam of electromagnetic noise aimed directly at Earth's South Pole. Specifically, at the Amundsen-Scott station. At first, they thought it was interference from a satellite. Then they thought it was an equipment malfunction. They even tore apart half the receivers, convinced something had fried. But nothing was broken. Nothing was malfunctioning. The signal was real. And the most terrifying part wasn't that Atlas sent it. It was that Atlas aimed it. Precisely. Deliberately. As if it had chosen that spot for a reason. Scientists played the signal back hundreds of times. At first, it sounded like static, but when they filtered the noise, they found a repeating pattern. one that matched Earth's own magnetic dipole frequency. Atlas was pinging the planet. Not randomly, systematically, like someone tapping their finger on a table waiting for you to answer. After the discovery, everything moved fast. Too fast. The U.S. scrambled a secure line with the Antarctic team. China demanded full spectral data. Europe demanded to know why the signal was so directional. But the country that reacted fastest was the one no one expected: India. Their radio observatory in Udi turned all its dishes towards Atlas within minutes, and what they found made the entire global network freeze. The signal wasn't just a ping, it was a scan. A high-resolution sweep across Earth's magnetic field, mapping it, layer by layer, from pole to pole, as if Atlas was analyzing how Earth holds itself together. One of the physicists monitoring the sweep said something that still sends chills down my spine. It's not looking at us, it's looking at Earth's planetary instructions. But that wasn't even the moment everything collapsed. That happened 2 hours later, when Atlas sent a second signal. This one wasn't directed at Earth. It was directed at the Moon. A short, sharp burst of energy, so strong the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter picked it up immediately. At first, everyone assumed it was a misaimed pulse, but then something impossible happened. The Moon rang. The signal induced a seismic echo, one strong enough that 5 separate moonquake sensors recorded it. A harmonic, a resonance, one that matched Atlas's earlier rotational frequency. Atlas wasn't just scanning Earth, it was testing Earth's satellite. For what purpose? No one knew, but the implications were catastrophic. If Atlas could excite lunar resonance, that meant it had the potential to manipulate gravitational or magnetic harmonics on a cosmic scale. And if it could do that to the Moon, it could do that to Earth. That's when panic spread, not among governments, but among scientists. Governments panicked later. Scientists panicked first. They held an emergency briefing. No recordings exist, the meeting was closed, and everyone who attended had to surrender their devices. But someone leaked the transcript. One phrase stood out above all others. Atlas is probing the architecture of the Earth-Moon system. Not our biology, not our communications, not our cities, our system. Our configuration, as if checking whether this planetary arrangement fit something it expected, or something it needed. And then Atlas did something even worse. It slowed down again. Another deceleration, larger than the previous one, bringing its arrival estimate closer by almost a full day. But its velocity wasn't decreasing randomly. The deceleration was synchronized with the Earth's rotation. Every time Earth completed one rotation, Atlas adjusted its speed by the same microscopic fraction, almost like it was matching us, studying our timing, waiting for something. By morning, the model's updated. Atlas's projected stop point wasn't a crash zone or a collision point. It wasn't even an orbit insertion. It was a position exactly 38,000 kilometers above Earth's equator, slightly above geostationary orbit, a position that satellites use, a position that ships use, a position chosen deliberately. That's when the conversation shifted from "will it hit us" to "what is it going to do when it arrives?" Governments tried to keep the public calm. They issued joint statements, assured everyone that 3I Atlas posed no immediate danger, promised transparency, promised safety, promised calm. But behind closed doors, the truth was the opposite. The first classified meeting of the Emergency Planetary Defense Council happened at 1447 UTC. The agenda was brutally short. We must intercept before it arrives. The new plan was more desperate than anything before it. Project Cerberus. 3 nuclear-powered kinetic interceptors launched from 3 continents, United States, Kazakhstan, and French Guiana, coordinated to hit Atlas simultaneously from different angles. The goal wasn't destruction. That was impossible. The goal was imbalance, knocking Atlas just slightly off course so that its chosen stop point would drift away from Earth. Even a drift of 0.02 degrees would send it thousands of kilometers off position by the time it arrived. It wasn't a plan. It was a gamble. And they knew it. They had to. Because the alternative was to let Atlas approach unhindered, and no one wanted to consider what that meant. But just as they finalized Project Cerberus, something happened that broke whatever hope remained. Atlas transmitted again, not as a pulse, not as a scan, as a beam. A long, sustained beam of narrowband energy. A message. A real message. Aimed not at the poles, not at the moon, but at Earth's satellites. One by one, satellites in medium Earth orbit began receiving the beam. Not all of them, only specific ones. Communication satellites, Earth observation satellites, military satellites. Atlas was illuminating every major surveillance system we have, touching them with the beam like points on a map. The strange part was, none of the satellites were damaged. None were disrupted. But every single one of them recorded the same anomaly, a microscopic fluctuation in their onboard gyroscopes.
Like a vibration, like a knock, gentle, polite, but deliberate. As if Atlas wasn't trying to blind our systems, it was trying to get their attention. One engineer monitoring the feed said the words that would haunt the entire team. It's pinging the watchers. After the beam ended, something even stranger happened. All satellites that received the beam turned slightly, less than a degree. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't thrusters. It wasn't internal error. Something external had influenced their orientation. This was the moment when, unofficially, behind closed doors, the agencies admitted what they'd been afraid to say. It can interact with our technology. Not destroy, not jam. Interact. Test. Evaluate. Some even said communicate, though no one wanted that word in writing. Meanwhile, Atlas kept approaching. And something else began to happen. Something subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Tides shifted, only by millimeters, but enough to show up in tidal gauges across the world. The ionosphere thickened. Radio noise increased. Birds in 2 hemispheres changed their migration paths. Whales deviated from their normal routes, and the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of Earth, jumped by 0.7 hertz, all synchronized with Atlas's approach. Not enough to harm, not enough to scare the public, but enough to terrify scientists who understood what even a small shift in planetary resonance could mean. Atlas wasn't attacking. Atlas wasn't harming. Atlas was affecting. Passively? Actively? No one knows. And then something happened that turned fear into dread. For the first time since entering the solar system, Atlas stopped rotating. Rotation is natural. Rotation is constant. Every object spins, even Oumuamua spun. But Atlas simply halted. Instantaneously, without slowing, without a transition. One moment spinning, the next moment perfectly still. Objects in space cannot do that. Not even in theory. Not without internal mechanisms or external control. And Atlas had just revealed it had both. The scientists monitoring it wrote a single line in their internal report. Atlas has entered a stationary observation state. Stationary. Observation. The words felt surgical. Cold. Surgical coldness is worse than aggression. It means calculation. It means preparation. And the world felt a shift.
Governments panicked. Military leaders demanded action. The Global Defense Coalition authorized Project Cerberus in full. The countdown began. But Atlas reacted immediately. It rotated again. Not normally, not with momentum, but with orientation. Slowly, smoothly, realigning itself, facing Earth. As if it sensed our intentions, as if it understood them, and as if, in its own distant, unfathomable way, it was responding. That's when the transmission came, the longest one yet. 29 seconds. A sweeping, undulating signal that passed through every frequency band humans use: radio, microwave, infrared, ultraviolet. It passed through everything like a hand sweeping across piano keys. But beneath the sweep was a repeating sub-pattern, and when deep learning models filtered it, the pattern wasn't random. It matched something, a mathematical structure, one known to all of humanity, the prime number sequence. Atlas was sending primes, not a language, not a threat, a universal sign of intelligence, a call, a demonstration, a statement. I understand. Do you? But the timing was horrifying, because the message arrived exactly 6 minutes after the world authorized the launch of 3 nuclear interceptors, almost as if Atlas knew, as if Atlas heard, and as if Atlas replied. The interceptors are still scheduled to launch. They haven't canceled the plan. They can't. Too much is at stake. But after Atlas sent prime numbers, something changed. Humanity is no longer preparing to stop an object. It is preparing to confront a mind. And minds don't collide. Minds interact. Minds judge. Minds decide. The last line in the newest classified report says the quiet part out loud. We are not facing an impact. We are facing an encounter. And encounters have outcomes. In 56 days, 3I Atlas will reach its chosen position. And the only question now is not whether Earth can stop it, but whether Earth should have tried to stop it.
If anyone thought the prime numbers were the peak of terror, they were wrong. Because today is when the world realized something far worse. 3I Atlas isn't just intelligent, it's aware. Aware of Earth, aware of our technology, aware of our defenses, and aware of our fear. And if what happened in the last 24 hours is any indication, Atlas might also be aware of our intentions before we even act on them. Everything began with the final preparations for Project Cerberus. 3 nuclear-powered kinetic interceptors, massive spear-like constructs designed to hit Atlas at relativistic velocity, were rolled onto their launch platforms. Governments insisted the operation was precautionary. They said it was responsible planetary stewardship. But behind closed doors, the truth was much uglier. Everyone in the room knew this could be humanity's last attempt to move Atlas off course before it reached Earth. And the most frightening part? Most of the officials weren't even convinced it would work. Still, the countdown began. The world didn't know. They carried on with their lives, working, commuting, scrolling through their feeds, while 3 nations prepared to hurl nuclear-tipped projectiles into deep space. But Atlas knew. Because 7 minutes after France armed its interceptor, Atlas emitted a new signal. Not primes this time, something else. A pulse of energy so thin, so quiet, that at first it was dismissed as an atmospheric disturbance. But then it repeated, and repeated again. And when the signal was isolated and slowed down, it wasn't random. It was a pattern. And worse, it was an imitation.
Atlas was mimicking the telemetry of the French interceptor. Every detail, every vibration, every calibration pulse, as if replaying it back to Earth, as if showing that it had already scanned the weapon, already understood it, already accounted for it. When that data reached the Defense Council, people shouted. Some demanded the launch be accelerated. Others insisted the operation should be canceled. But before any decision could be made, the second anomaly occurred. In Japan's Mission Control Center, the engineers monitoring their interceptor reported a sudden, unexplained shift in onboard voltage. Not a malfunction, not a short circuit, an external influence. The power dipped by exactly 1.618 volts, the golden ratio, before returning to normal. Engineers froze. Scientists turned pale, because this wasn't a glitch. It was a signature, a mathematical calling card, as if Atlas wanted us to know it touched the system and chose not to break it. Fear is one thing, humiliation is another, and what happened next felt like both. The U.S. Interceptor, the largest and most advanced of the three, was conducting final thruster tests when all of its onboard cameras suddenly went black. Not permanently, not damaged, just black, for 46 seconds. When the feed returned, everything was fine. No hardware was altered, no data was corrupted, but 46 seconds of the craft's internal recordings were missing, cleanly cut out like an edit in a film. Atlas hadn't destroyed the weapon. It hadn't even interfered with its systems. It had simply blindfolded it, probably to see if it could. And now every engineer in the room realized a horrifying truth. Atlas had direct access to the interceptor's electronics. It could disable them instantly. It could detonate them prematurely. It could redirect them towards Earth. But it didn't. And that restraint, more than any attack, terrified the Global Council. Because it meant Atlas wasn't reacting emotionally. It was analyzing, evaluating, judging. By now, the countdown to launch was just hours away. And something else began to happen, something that turned fear into full-scale dread. Around the world, random devices began picking up faint signals. Not radios, not satellites, everyday objects. Smartphones, car dashboards, baby monitors, GPS receivers, all detecting short, ultra-low frequency pulses. At first they seemed random, like interference from power lines. But then someone noticed the pulses were synchronized. Not globally, locally. Each region receiving a slightly different sequence, as if Atlas was scanning each area independently. But the worst realization came when someone compared the patterns. The pulses were shaped like terrain maps, topographical outlines. The Andes, the Sahara, the Himalayas, the Appalachian Range. Atlas wasn't scanning Earth's surface from afar. It was scanning it through our electronics, using human-made devices as sensors, turning billions of small machines into a planetary nervous system feeding it information. The Global Council panicked. Emergency legislation forced networks offline. GPS systems were shut down. Communications satellites switched to backup protocols. But it didn't matter. Atlas had already seen what it needed to see. And then everything went quiet. Too quiet, as if the entire planet held its breath. For 6 hours, Atlas emitted no signals, made no adjustments, no course corrections, no rotations, nothing. Scientists called it the still period, but governments had another name for it, the decision window. Something was about to happen. Something big. And then, at 3:11 UTC, Atlas ignited. Not an explosion, not a weapon discharge, a flare, a brilliant, impossible flare of energy erupting from one side of the object, like a cosmic lighthouse beam sweeping across the void.
Every telescope caught it, every observatory scrambled. The flare lasted only 9 seconds, but released more energy than a solar prominence. And when the flare ended, 3I Atlas was gone. Not disappeared, not vanished, but moved, instantly, as if it had displaced itself, as if it had shifted position across space without traveling the distance between. One frame it was here, the next frame it was tens of thousands of kilometers away. No acceleration, no motion blur, no trajectory, just a jump, a relocation. Telemetry analysts refused to believe what they saw. They accused the data of being corrupted, frames missing, timestamps failing. But cross-network verification confirmed it across 16 independent systems. Atlas had performed a maneuver no human, no machine, no natural object had ever demonstrated. Something only hypothetical physics considered: quantum displacement. Scientists lost their composure right there on the call. One researcher fainted, another began swearing uncontrollably, because if Atlas could jump, if it could relocate at will, then Project Cerberus was not just doomed, it was meaningless. You cannot intercept what you cannot predict. You cannot strike something that doesn't have to stay where it is. And then came the breaking point. Atlas returned, not to its original position, not to its predicted path, but closer, much closer, almost too close. It reappeared 70,000 kilometers closer to Earth, like a chess piece moved deliberately across a board. And for the first time since its discovery, Atlas oriented itself vertically, its longest axis pointing directly at Earth, like a spear aimed downward. That orientation triggered emergency sirens across every major observatory on the planet, because natural objects don't orient themselves with purpose. Natural objects don't point. Only guided objects point. Military analysts, physicists, astronomers all reached the same horrifying conclusion. Atlas was positioning. For what purpose, no one knew. But the timing was catastrophic, because Atlas pointed at Earth exactly 40 minutes before the scheduled launch of the interceptors. It knew. It understood the countdown, and it responded. In the next hour, all 3 nations faced the same crisis. Their interceptors malfunctioned simultaneously. Not catastrophically, not permanently, but precisely in the one subsystem responsible for automated correction. Someone or something disabled the stabilization software. In all 3, at the exact same millisecond. That coordination is impossible. That timing is impossible, unless Atlas had full awareness of what we were about to do. The Council fell into chaos. Some demanded launch anyway. Others screamed that launching now would be suicide. One delegate from Japan shouted that Atlas was testing our aggression, waiting to see if humanity was hostile. But then someone proposed the idea no one wanted to voice.
For 54 days, the world lived in a state that had no name. Not war, not peace, not fear exactly. Something deeper, something worse. Anticipation. Because 3I/Atlas was no longer just a distant visitor, but a presence hanging over humanity like a silent verdict waiting to be read. Every hour it drifted closer to its chosen point above Earth. Every day its internal hum grew louder, deeper, more structured. And now, as I speak, it has begun the final approach. No more jumps, no more evasions, no more signals. Just steady, deliberate motion, closing the last 3,000 kilometers between it and us. And you need to hear the truth of what happened in these final days, because once you hear it, you'll understand why the world's leaders stopped talking about defense and even stopped talking about survival. Because by now they have realized a terrible possibility. Maybe this was never a confrontation at all. Maybe Earth was never the target. Maybe Earth was simply the destination. It began on day 53. A tremor was recorded across the world, so faint most people didn't feel it, but strong enough that seismologists recognized it instantly. A global oscillation, synchronous, perfectly timed, as if something had struck Earth, not physically, but harmonically. The tremor matched the frequency Atlas had been emitting in its energetic consolidation. That meant one thing: Atlas was affecting the Earth's crust. Not violently, not destructively, but intentionally. Like a singer finding the resonant note in a glass. And then another anomaly followed. Birds changed direction mid-flight, entire flocks, in every region. Sea turtles abandoned migration paths they had followed for centuries. Whales broke formation and veered off course, all following the same trajectory, toward the equator. It took scientists half a day to connect the dots. Atlas's hum wasn't affecting the oceans or the air. It was affecting magnetoreception, the natural compass inside living organisms. For the first time, Atlas wasn't interacting with machines. It was interacting with life. The Global Council panicked. Emergency meetings, faster-than-light rumors on social media, 1,000 conspiracy theories erupting like boils. Some said Atlas was calling the animals. Some said it was disrupting them. Some said it was selecting them. And none of them were prepared for what happened next. Late that evening, in the middle of a storm over Brazil, the world's most sensitive gamma-ray detector recorded a burst. An enormous burst. Not from the sun, not from deep space, from Atlas. A burst so powerful that the system flagged it as a supernova-scale event. But there was no explosion, no flash visible in the sky, no radiation shower reaching Earth. Somehow, the burst was contained entirely around Atlas itself, like a star imploding inside a bubble. When the data reached the experts, their faces went gray, because gamma-ray bursts don't appear without catastrophic destruction. But Atlas wasn't breaking. It was transforming. Then came the most terrifying discovery, one made not by governments, but by amateurs. In Argentina, a group of astrophotographers captured high-resolution images of Atlas's surface, not the usual blur, not the comet-like coma, the surface. Sharp, detailed, and in the photos, structures, not symmetrical ones, not mechanical ones, but patterns, grooves, channels, ripple-like formations radiating from its core. At first they looked like impact scars, but impact scars don't arrange themselves in perfect fractal spirals, nor do they light up from within, because that's what happened. Atlas glowed, not uniformly, not randomly, but in a sequence, each groove illuminating from the inside outward, like veins carrying light instead of blood. A pulse, a heartbeat, a function. The pattern wasn't organic, but it also wasn't mechanical. It was something in between, something Earth has no category for. Scientists called it active topology formation. Military analysts called it armament. The public called it the awakening. But what came after was far worse, because Atlas spoke. I don't mean language, not words, not audio, but communication. intentional communication. At precisely 2:40 UTC, everyone wearing wireless earbuds, Bluetooth headphones, or any low-frequency audio device heard the same sound. Not through the speakers, not through the network, directly through the electronics themselves. A low, vibrating hum, followed by a rising harmonic, followed by silence. That was it. Just 3 seconds, but every device on Earth played it at the exact same moment. No network could coordinate that. No satellite system could synchronize that. No human could plan that. And for the first time, Earth was forced to acknowledge the truth. Atlas had reached into our technology, but not to damage it, to notify us, to announce something, to call. The Global Council forced every nation into lockdown. Military, scientific, political leaders were rushed underground. Defense systems switched to standby. The skies were cleared. All commercial launches were grounded. And above us, Atlas drifted into position. 38,000 kilometers above the equator, hovering, waiting, perfectly still. And then something happened that no one had predicted. The Earth's magnetic field surged, a spike so strong that auroras appeared at the equator, green and purple curtains of light dancing across skies where they had never been seen in human history. People around the world stepped outside and stared upward in awe, unaware that this wasn't beauty. This was a warning, a pulse, a synchronizing shockwave. But a shockwave for what? That answer came just minutes later. Atlas opened. Not physically. There were no hatches, no mechanical panels, but its fractal grooves parted, rearranged, reconfigured into a structure that resembled an iris widening to let in more light. Inside, telescopes recorded something so unnatural it almost broke the live stream. A hollow core, not made of rock, not made of metal, made of emptiness. A chamber, a cavity, a space carved out with impossible precision, and at the center of that cavity something moving. Slowly, deliberately. At first it looked like plasma, then like liquid, then like a sphere of condensed energy suspended in the core of Atlas like a beating star. Scientists had no idea what it was. Physicists declared it violated every rule of matter they knew. Military analysts asked if it was a weapon. But the truth was obvious the moment the sphere began to expand. Atlas wasn't preparing to attack. Atlas was preparing to release something. Suddenly, every system on Earth lit up with interference. Radio stations went dead, GPS signals scrambled, power grids flickered. Not as an attack, almost as a side effect. As if the energy inside Atlas was so immense it distorted every field around it. The Global Council prepared for the worst. Nuclear shields were armed, air forces scrambled jets, anti-ballistic networks activated. But none of it mattered. Because Atlas wasn't aiming. Atlas wasn't charging a weapon. Atlas wasn't hostile. Atlas was opening a doorway. The energy sphere expanded until it touched the inner walls of the cavity. For a moment, everything was still, perfectly still. Then, like a drop of water falling into a pond, the sphere folded in on itself, inverted, and vanished. Not exploded, not imploded. Vanished, leaving behind a void. A circular, impossibly dark void suspended inside Atlas. No stars visible through it. No back